morning. It's good to see everyone here today. We're thankful for the presence of each one. As Brother Gary mentioned, Brother Paul is in South Carolina for a gospel meeting, so I appreciate the opportunity to fill in, to stand before you this morning. Before we get started, our daily Bible reading for this morning, our junior and senior high class and first through fourth grade boys had 100%. The auditorium class was up a little bit, still not quite up to their standard they've been setting, had 72% in the auditorium and wound up with a 72% average overall. So better, but we'll still work hard to try to improve that, so we've got 100% all the way across the board. This morning for our lessons, you've seen, if you've picked up one of the announcement sheets, if you've looked there, and you've seen that the title of the lesson is Go On or Go Back. And for this lesson, we're going to focus on the Exodus. There it goes. We're going to focus on the Exodus, and we're going to try to compare how the situation that the Israelites were dealing with, of course, Moses, as he leads them out of Egypt after 400 plus years of bondage, of slavery, a very difficult life there. God has a promised land waiting for them, but it's going to be a difficult journey. It's going to be a hard time in that 40 years between the time that they leave Egypt and the time that they finally reach the promised land. And along the way, there's going to be a lot of complaining, a lot of murmuring. There's going to be finger pointing. There's going to be a lot of things that occur. It's going to it's going to be frustrating, obviously, to Moses. It's going to be frustrating to God Himself. It's the people are going to constantly be complaining, and they're upset about the situation. God has gotten them out of this situation where they've been in bondage, where they've been slaves, they've been beaten, they've been whipped, mistreated. But they thought that things had gotten so bad in the wilderness on this journey to the promised land that they were ready to go back. And so think about this idea of going on or going back. Just in the last couple of weeks in my 8th grade American history class, we've been talking about westward expansion, talking about the movement of people as they were going west, and several different reasons. Obviously, the gold rush in California in 1849, but also just the idea of the fertile farmland that was available up in the Oregon country. Some of you may have read the book or maybe have seen the movie, and it's been years since I've last seen the movie, but it was entitled 7 Alone, and it was based on the true story of the Sager family, Henry and Naomi Sager, and then they had 6 children. They lived in Missouri. They had a farm, had a homestead there, but Henry he wanted this better land. He wanted this fertile farmland that was available up in Oregon, and so he was constantly trying to convince his wife to pack up and move. She didn't want to leave because she had family that was nearby there in Missouri, and the idea of undertaking this difficult journey and moving to such a far-off land, just wasn't something that she was interested in. Finally convinced her, and so along with several others, there were about 70, I think, wagons that were in this wagon train as they left Missouri and headed kind of the west-northwest as they were working their way towards Oregon. Along the way, however, the father, Henry, is going to get sick. He is going to contract dysentery or camp fever, as they would call it, and it's just a fever. It's severe abdominal cramps and pain. It's an intestinal inflammation, winds up causing severe diarrhea. Most of the time, people would become very dehydrated, and at that day and time, in the mid-1800s, there was no medical attention, obviously, out on the prairie as well, and so most people died from it. And unfortunately, the father, Henry, is going to die, so it leaves the mother as well as the 6 children, and then she was pregnant and had just, in fact, had given birth to their 7th child. As they continue on their journey after much deliberation on whether or not to go on or go back, she was convinced the best thing was just to head back and go back to Missouri where her family was at. But it was going to mean her and the 7 young children. The oldest son, John, was about 13, 14 years old, and then again, ranging down to a newborn infant. It was just going to be difficult for them by themselves to go back, so they were convinced by the rest of their party, the rest of the group, to continue on with them. So they continue on, heading towards Oregon, and then just a few weeks later, she gets sick, the mother does, Naomi gets sick, and she dies as well. So you have the 7 children that are left, 7 alone, and they're having to make the decision. Do we go on or do we go back? And some of the people were trying to convince them to go back to where their family was, but the oldest son, John, he was determined to carry out his father's desire, his wish to have this farm in Oregon. And so they're going to continue the journey. Of course, they wind up falling behind. The rest of the train moves on, and then they just can't keep up. Just these 7 kids. One of the oldest daughters, she jumps off the wagon one day and breaks her leg, and so they're dealing with that. Just all sorts of difficulties along the way. Eventually, they make their way out to Oregon, reach the Whitman mission. If you're familiar with a little bit of history during that time, Dr. Marcus Whitman and his wife Narcissa, they were some missionaries that were in Oregon who were working with some of the Indian tribes, especially the Cayuse tribe that was living there. But the 7 children finally make it to the Whitman mission. By that time, they were just almost dead. They had not had enough food to eat. They were physically exhausted. Hypothermia had taken hold. They were almost at the point of death, but eventually they made it all the way, and they made the decision to continue on, to go on. They didn't turn back. Well, the Israelites obviously were dealing with many of these same problems. Do we go on? Do we go back? What are we going to do? So we think about this, and we think about the Exodus. It's actually quite an event when we consider the size and the scope and the scale of this adventure. It started in faith. They had this promise that God was going to free them. God was going to help them to leave Egypt, and He was going to give them this promised land. We know in Exodus 14 that they're going to be delivered by the Lord. They're going to leave Egypt. They number over 500,000 men. Said there was about 603,550 age 20 and older warriors, men of war. They're in Numbers chapter 1, verses 46 and 47. The spirits were high. Anytime you set out on a trip, even if it's going to be a long trip, boy, you're excited, you're looking forward to it. Here in the last several years, our family has traveled to Florida, we've traveled to Montana, and of course you get the car loaded up, and you're ready to go, and everybody's excited. But boy, it doesn't take long, you get down the road, and everybody's griping, and Mama, he's looking at me, or one of those things. And it's not always easy. You can't agree on where you're going to eat supper. We're going to McDonald's, we're going to Burger King, going somewhere else, and everybody's coming out, I don't want that. And just, there's these difficulties that we face. Obviously, they pale in comparison to what these people were facing. We weren't walking to Montana. If we were going to have to do that, we wouldn't go, obviously. Okay, we'd have stayed home. But again, think about the comparisons today. It's easy to take these trips, even with some of the minor headaches. Now you may have a flash, you may have some car trouble, different things. Take a wrong turn and you wind up lost. Those things can happen, obviously. But we would compare to what we would do today back then. It's hard for us to kind of grasp, especially again the size and the scope and the scale. We can get our 4 family members together, and we can get our stuff packed, and we can get loaded up and head off. Imagine trying to take several million people in this group. Okay, we're talking about over 600,000 men, and then you have the women, the children, the animals, everything that they had. This would have been something to see. It would have been quite something to see as they were proceeding. Obviously, starting off with their hopes, their expectations high, the hope was strong, and ultimately, it's going to end in a good way. It's going to end in victory. We know that eventually, after 40 years, they're going to finally reach the promised land. Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 5, Moses talks about the fact that for 40 years they wandered the wilderness, and this is kind of hard to imagine. Of course, obviously with God all things are possible, but he says that their clothing and their sandals in 40 years did not wear out. So with all that walking, with all that traveling, 40 years, we get upset when I've had that shirt or I've had those shoes for 6 months or a year, I'm not going to wear that anymore. Imagine wearing the same thing for 40 years. Okay? So obviously God was taking care of them, was watching over them. And then in Joshua chapter 3, we have the passage where they in fact did cross over the Jordan River into the promised land. But along the way, as we said, with all of the difficulties they're going to face, there's going to be many who are not going to be happy. There's going to be many who are not going to be satisfied with the fact that there's going to be some trouble. There's going to be some tribulation. There's going to be some problems along the way. The journey's not always going to be easy. Okay? And some of them are determined that, hey, it'd be easier just to go back. It's going a long hard, and that's going to be too hard. We'd rather go back, and we'd rather be slaves, and we'd rather submit ourselves to that lifestyle than to what God has promised us. Numbers chapter 21, verse 4 through 6, just kind of paraphrasing a little bit, says that they became very discouraged on the way, and many died. Okay, we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. I have a little bit of a map here. You can kind of see the journey that they would have undertaken as they're going to leave Egypt, as they're going to cross the Red Sea, and as they journey around the Sinai Peninsula, working their way eventually up, and then crossing the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Okay, we can see that for 40 years of that journey, and you look at it and say, man, there's got to be a better way. Okay, obviously the start wasn't an easy beginning. They're going to leave Egypt after Pharaoh finally allows them to head out on their way. But he changes his mind. His heart is hardened. He's determined to pursue them, to try to chase them down, to capture them, and to bring them back. Of course, immediately whenever they look back and see the Egyptian army bearing down on them, the people are upset. They're complaining. But God gives them a way to escape. He's going to help them as they cross the Red Sea, as He parts the waters, and then as they get across. Obviously, we know the story that God allows the waters to come back in on the army, and they're going to be consumed there. So it wasn't an easy beginning. And again, you think about the travels that they had to undertake, and you look at that journey. It would be a whole lot easier just to head right straight across there, wouldn't it? The shortest distance between 2 lines or 2 points is a straight line. Well, that would have been the easiest way, but God had in store for them kind of some tests. There was going to be some trials and tribulations, and they didn't understand why God required them to do a lot of things. A lot of doubt, a lot of misgivings along the way. And you can understand their concern, their worry. What's going to happen? We don't have food, we don't have clothing, we don't have shelter. They didn't understand that God would take care of them. And so there was worry. And it gets to the point where they're in Numbers chapter 11, verses 4 through 6. As they're hungry, they're concerned about the lack of food, and they're ready to go back. They want to go back to that former life. And so we will see that they're going to have difficulty in accepting the situation that they're in and trying to be content. Well, some lessons that we can learn. Romans chapter 15, verse 4 tells us that these things that were written in the past are written for us. It's for our learning. So there's some things, hopefully, some lessons this morning that we can learn from what happened to the Israelites. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10 if you have your Bibles with you. Let's look at these verses right quick. Have some of the verses up on the board, but then some of them we'll turn to and look at. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Beginning in verse 1. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank out of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. With most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. And do not become idolaters as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play, nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did. And in one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt Christ, also as some of them were tempted and were destroyed by serpents. Nor complain as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation is overtaken you, except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. We can see from these verses here that as we compare our lives as Christians today, compare that to what the Israelites were having to endure as they were traveling throughout the wilderness. There's going to be trials, there's going to be temptations, there's going to be difficulties. Okay, how we respond is just going to be what's important. Okay, God's going to provide a way. Now He's not going to tempt us more than what we're able to withstand, and what we're able to handle. But we have to be able to withstand those temptations and to carry on. We have to continue to go on because there will be a reward. And the Israelites just couldn't see that. Many of them couldn't see that at the end that there was going to be that reward. There was going to be that promised land that had been told about and talked about and been foretold, and they just couldn't be patient enough. They couldn't endure what they were having to go through in order to get to that promised land. So hopefully, like I said, we can see some comparisons with our lives. What were some of the things that they had to face? Well, the first obstacle was their escape to begin with, as we talked about a moment ago. We know that as they leave Egypt, and again, you have over 600,000 warriors, and then all the women and the children and all the possessions. You have several million people trying to move as a group, heading out across the desert. And then they look back and see the Egyptian army is chasing them down, is pursuing. And obviously the people were afraid. They felt like that they were led out of Egypt only to be massacred, to be slaughtered. They didn't see any way that they could go toe-to-toe with the Egyptian army and have a chance of winning. They couldn't defend themselves, and so they were afraid that they were going to be defeated, overrun, and then taken back into Egypt into captivity. But the Lord provided a way of salvation. He provided freedom for them, as they crossed the Red Sea and the Egyptian army is going to be destroyed. Well, some lessons for us today. We know that Satan is pursuing us, okay? Just as the Egyptians were chasing down the Israelites and trying to capture them. Well, Satan is wandering about. He's going about like a roaring lion. There in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. So we know that Satan is after us. We're going to be tempted. There's going to be tribulations that we face. And change is not easy. We're told in Acts chapter 17, verse 30, that we have to change our lives. We have to repent. This times of ignorance that before we were able to kind of get away with, but God expects us to repent. Just turn away from that old life of sin. Turn away and do what is right now. And it's not always easy. For many people who have lived in the world, and we talked about it in class days, Kevin talking about some of his points there, that it's hard to give up some of those things and to just completely exclude those sins and that former way of life. Sometimes people will still do a little bit of it, have a little bit of that old life. It's not easy to do. But just as God is going to provide salvation there at the Red Sea for the Israelites, the Egyptian army is going to be destroyed there, and He's going to offer this reward of that promised land for them. We have a promised land as well. We have heaven awaiting us if we can make it through the trials and temptations of this life, the tribulations of this life. Well, their hunger is going to be another obstacle that they have to face. Exodus chapter 16, the first 3 verses talk about them longing for it. They remember what life was like in Egypt. Now, you think about that life as slaves, as servants. They were beaten, they were whipped, they were obviously mistreated, but they had forgotten about that because of their hunger. And they were complaining against God in verses 1 through 6 of Numbers chapter 11. But God will ultimately provide them food. Now, we know the story is He's going to provide them not only manna for a while, and of course they complain about the manna. They want meat as well, and He's going to offer the quail for them to eat. And so they constantly complain, and every complaint God is going to try to take care of them. He shows that He is there to serve them and to take care of them. He loves them because they are His children. But it's never good enough for them. They're constantly complaining. They just never have the trust and the faith in God that He will take care of them. But they're longing for this former life. They want to go back to Egypt. But how quickly they forgot how badly that they were mistreated. And these taskmasters that obviously would have beaten and whipped them, trying to get them to do as much work as possible. Lives that were bitter, were difficult with this bondage, that they were forced to do all this service. Exodus chapter 1, verse 11 through 22 talks about performing this service with vigor. They had to work as hard as they possibly could, or they would be beaten. Even to the point where their newborn sons were killed. It got to the point where the Israelites were going to be outnumbering the Egyptians. And the Pharaoh was worried that one of these days, hey, there's going to be more of them than there are of us, and they will be able to overrun us. So they start trying to limit the population. And so it said, if there's a female child that is born, and she shall be allowed to live. But if a male child is born, then he is to be killed. So they're trying to take away those male children, and they'd even forgotten that many of them had lost their sons. The one thing they hadn't forgot about was the fish, the cucumbers, the garlic, and all this food, the melons. We had food to eat. Okay? We think about sometimes our physical bodies, we let our bodies control our mind. Okay? Instead of our mind controlling our body. And when we get hungry, we get thirsty, we get tired, sometimes we lose focus. Okay? We get hungry. Of course, our idea of hunger today is we haven't eaten in a few hours. Okay? There's people around the world, obviously, that have not eaten for maybe days. Okay? We don't really understand true hunger. We don't know what that's like. Okay? These people thought they were experiencing true hunger. They'd gone just a short while without that nourishment that they had had in Egypt. Well, they wanted that again. Okay? They didn't think that God was going to provide that for them. So they wanted to go back to that old life. And again, we understand today. We get hungry and we forget about everything else. And, our attitudes, our moods, our emotions change. We're all familiar with the Snickers commercial. Eat a Snickers. You're not yourself when you're hungry. Okay? And so this hunger that they had was changing their attitude. Well, we need to be careful that we don't allow that same thing to happen to us today. We can wish for our former lives of sin. We maybe hunger and thirst for those things that we used to do, that old life that we used to live. Okay, so we need to be careful that we don't go back to that old way. Christian's life is both hard and easy. Now, Christ says that He will bear our burdens for us. Okay, His yoke is easy, the burdens can be light, so it can be an easy life. But we also know that we will be persecuted. These verses here tell us that those who follow after Christ will be persecuted. Any follower, any Christian will be persecuted. Now, Thankfully, we live in a country where we don't have to fear being persecuted, maybe like the first century Christians were. We don't have to worry about being rounded up, gathered up, and thrown into to the arena, to the Colosseum, and be attacked by wild animals, or be used as, the targets for the gladiators to attack. Whatever the situation may be, we think about the apostles and some of the dangers that they faced. Many of them, their lives, they were martyrs because they were killed because of their service, their faithfulness, their dedication to Christ. We think about Paul, everything that he went through, all the persecutions that he faced. We don't have to face those things, thankfully, in the world that we live in today. But there are ways that we can be persecuted, and we can't let that stand in the way of continuing to go on and not go back. We can't use that as an excuse that, well, Christian's life is too hard, I'm just going to go back to the old way. And that's not what we need to do. Well, that hunger that these Israelites, the problems that they were dealing with, and some more lessons that we can think about today, obviously wanting to go back to that old life of sin, but sometimes as Christians, those who are weak, that hunger for other things kind of takes their focus away. And they're wanting something that is more fulfilling to them than what they actually need. They grow tired of doctrinal preaching, good, sound preaching. You think about the religious world today, these denominational preachers, these preachers that you see on TV or you hear on the radio, the books that are being published. The preaching that they're doing, the teaching that they're doing is about family and about joy of life and peace and blessings and things. And of course, that's the big thing is if you serve God, then you're going to be blessed. He's going to take care of you and give you everything that you possibly want. That feel-good type of religion that we're familiar with today. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people today, a lot of Christians, that's what they want, rather than, again, that good, hard, sound preaching. They want more entertainment. They want what's going to make them feel good, not worshiping God and understanding that that's the true nature of our worship. The purpose of our lives is to worship God and to serve Him, not the other way around. And so, unfortunately, they're going to be influenced. They're going to be affected by those around them in the world. They're going to see what they're doing in their religions and their teachings and their doctrines and their faith, and they want to try to do the same thing. They want to imitate them. The third obstacle, the third problem that the Israelites had to deal with was their doubt. They never fully trusted God. They never put their full backing and support in Him. They claim, we've been brought out here to die. Moses, you led us out here to die. Why didn't we just stay there? We may have been beaten, we may have been whipped, we may have lived a hard life there in Egypt. That was still better than coming out here in the wilderness and dying. The Egyptian army almost killed us. Now we're out here, we're hungry, we don't have a place to stay, we're on the move. They're just constantly complaining, constantly murmuring, and they even question whether or not the Lord is among us. They don't understand that God is with them at all times. And understanding that the physical presence that was there, we know the cloud that would lead them during the day, the fire that would lead them during the nighttime, seeing the other miracles that were being done, the things that God was doing for them, but it still wasn't enough. They still had doubt. They didn't understand that God truly was among them. And today, again, understanding that we can be persecuted, and whether it's at work maybe with friends, family, neighbors, there's different situations that we can face, and maybe when things aren't going well and we're getting a little discouraged, well, is it worth it? Is God with us? People today sometimes are not satisfied with the promise that has been given by God. It's just not good enough. They know what's awaiting, but they'd rather enjoy the world that they live in and enjoy the things that this world has to offer rather than what is to come. And so many people get caught up in that. So that's what was the problem with the Israelites. Well, again, their doubt, we look at the problems that they were dealing with, and the fact that they were questioning God, they were questioning Moses as God's servant and leading them. Well, today people are not satisfied with their religious lives. They're not satisfied with the church. They're not satisfied with the work of the church. God has outlined what we're to do and how we're to live and what He expects out of us. But for many, that's not good enough because it's maybe too restrictive. It's too exclusive. You think about the true worship of the church. You go back to the example that's set for us in the New Testament by the first century church. It's very different than what you see in much of the religious world today. You say, well, the worship, it is simple. We have 5 acts of worship we're to follow. We're to sing, we're to pray, we're to give of our means, we're to teach, we're to study, to preaching that we're doing right now, and then to partake of the Lord's Supper. Those 5 acts of worship. And that's what God has commanded. We saw the example that was given in the New Testament, and that's what we try to follow as members of the Lord's church. But today, that's just not enough. People want more, okay? They want that entertainment value. They want to be able to go to a worship service, and they want it more like a pep rally than what a true worship service should be like. They want to be built up, and they want to be lifted up, and they want to leave energized and recharged in a different way than what we should be. Obviously, we should be built up. We're told that our assembling together of ourselves, Hebrews chapter 10, we're not only building ourselves up, but we're exhorting and building up each other. We're encouraging each other. And so there is an encouragement there. We're to leave the worship service recharged, but not going out, like we're ready to go play a football game or something like that, like people want today. So some people think it's too boring, too restrictive, too exclusive. They want the emotion to come out, and that's with the praise teams and the lights and the lasers and all that goes on. And to many people, unfortunately, the church has become more of a social setting rather than a religious type setting. They are members of a particular church, a particular denomination, because of all the different things it has to offer. They have all these different classes that maybe they offer during the week, or they have these athletic events. They sponsor a church basketball or softball league, or they've got all these different things that are going on. And obviously it's important that we spend time with each other, that we fellowship one with another. There's so many things that we have going on, and obviously we may not always be able to participate in every one, but you think today we have the fellowship meal after our morning worship service. Tomorrow night is the men's night out, okay, planning to go to Chickasha. The women, they have their monthly women's night out, ladies' night out, where they go eat and just trying to spend time together, trying to encourage each other, trying to build each other up. So that's important, but that can't be the main focus. That can't be the only purpose for this church, okay? To make each other feel good and feel like, you just got a place to belong. Our purpose is to worship God and to reach out to the world and save those, try to help save those who are lost. So continue on thinking about some of the other obstacles they faced is their lack of leadership. Now, I'm not talking about Moses, okay, but some of the other leaders, some of the other men that were responsible for helping to lead the Israelites. They were pretty shaky in the example that they set. They were pretty shaky in the decisions that they made. They didn't back Moses. They didn't follow God in some of the decisions that they made. They're going to, again, not trust God that He's going to take care of them. I would think of probably the greatest example of their doubt and their inability to do what God expects of them is when they finally reach the Jordan River. They are about to enter across into the Promised Land. But first they want to find out what's out there. Okay, what are we going to be up against? God tells them that He's going to be with them. They're going to be able to defeat anybody that stands in their way. He's going to give them victory in battle over anyone that's there in the Promised Land. But they had their doubts. And so they send in the 12 spies. They go in, they're going to look at the land, they're going to see the people, and they're going to come back and give a report. We know when they come back, 10 of the men said, these people are huge. They're giants. Okay? There's no way that we can defeat them. 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, said, hey, we got this. We can handle this. God's on our side. It's not a problem. We can take them. Now, the leaders, they listened to the 10 rather than the 2. They said, no, it's going to be too much for us. Once again, God's brought us out here to die. He's promised us all this, and He's not going to hold up on His end in the very end. So they weren't willing to go ahead and cross into the Promised Land and try to take the land like they were told to do. Of course, we know that time after time, as they continue to fail God, as they continue to not hold up on their end, there's many tribulations that they're faced with. There's going to be situations where many of them are going to die. And then ultimately, God says, okay, fine. If this is the way that we're going to be, everybody who is 20 years and older, basically, you're not going to get to go into the Promised Land. Okay? Joshua and Caleb, He's going to allow them to go in, but all of you that are older, you adults, you're not going to be allowed to go in because of your doubt, because of your failings, because of your lack of faithfulness. And so, unfortunately, the leaders there in the Israelite group, they're not going to trust Moses. They're not going to trust Joshua and Caleb. They believe the evil report. They go along with that, and they rejected good leadership. As we said, God's judgment is going to be upon them, and they tell them that, okay, only Joshua and Caleb are going to be the only adult men. They're going to be able to travel across. We know that even Moses himself, Okay, just trying to understand God's judgment, and it can be severe. As faithful as Moses was, and every time that he did what God told him to do, and the people were rejecting him, every time that the people were doubting him, and he continues to do what God says. But that one time, when God told him to speak to the rock, and out of his frustration, he struck the rock, and that mistake is going to keep him, after 40 years of leading them through the wilderness, up through thick and thin, through all the difficulties, and that's going to prevent him from being able to receive that reward. So, some lessons for us. We need good leadership, and we're so blessed with that. The eldership here in this congregation, we've got men who are of faith, men of a vision. Again, in this congregation, it's important that we have good relationships with each other, that we're there for each other, but the purpose for this congregation, and so thankful for Brother Paul's lessons that he's been bringing here lately, just trying to encourage us to get more involved and understand that our duty is to look to those around us, to look to those in the world that are lost. Of course, we've had the Fishers of Men program last summer, and working on the visitation, the personal work visitation, trying to reach those that maybe are members who are unfaithful, or others who are maybe fallen away, or maybe some prospects, and trying to reach out to those who are lost and to help them so that they may have that opportunity for salvation. Every blessing that God has offered for us, His promise, it's there for us to either accept it or reject it. Okay, not sure what happened there. Sorry. Let's try to go backwards. Talking about going on, and it went on, didn't it? I don't have to go back. One more. All right, sorry about that. What happened? We have to be able to make sure that we're fighting for truth over error, that righteousness must overcome sin. Heaven must be more important to us rather than hell. We must believe, we must trust in God. Again, thinking about the leadership, the lack of good leadership, the promised land was right there for the taking, but they didn't want to get it. They didn't want to do what was necessary. They didn't want to reach out and grab it. Well, heaven is there for our taking. Will we do the same thing? Will we not trust God? Will we allow outside things to interfere with that opportunity for salvation? Or will we reach out and grasp heaven? Will we let it go? Fifth obstacle was contention. A lot of disagreements, a lot of arguments, a lot of doubt within the camp. We know that some of them started questioning Moses and his ability to lead. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this just to make yourself important? Are you doing it for personal gain? Korah is going to question and even claim that Moses has failed them there in Numbers chapter 16. The congregation, talking about the multitude of people, they were also complaining. They start questioning Moses, and why are you and Aaron doing this? It's just so that you can feel important, you can be popular, and things like that. So within the Israelite group, they had problems. Well, the church also has troubles from within, and going back to the very beginning, Galatians talks about the problem that they had with the Judaizers, those who were wanting to be a part of the Christian faith, the New Testament faith, but still taking some of the things from the old Jewish faith, some things from the Old Testament, trying to bind some of those things. And of course, they had to try to weed them out and try to show them that they were wrong. You had those that were the Gnostics. They felt like that they could achieve a level of knowledge that they could actually be responsible in a way for their salvation. It wasn't about what God was doing for them. It was about what they could do. It's very much like today. It's all about ourselves. It's all about what we can do and what we want to do rather than what God has said. So that was a problem. 3 John verse 9 talks about Diotrephes. He wanted to be in charge. He wanted to make the decisions, and he didn't want anybody on the outside telling him what was going on. He wanted to be prominent in their congregation. In fact, to the point where he didn't want to accept the apostles when they came to visit. So a warning there against preeminence. And then Revelation chapter 2, talking about compromisers, those who allow false teachings and other things to pervert the faith. So we have to be aware of that as well. Again, some of the lessons for us today. The unfaithful will often complain. A Christian who is about to quit finds fault with the others, starting with the preacher, the elders, teachers, finally with the church, and then those who want to complain, they'll even find fault with the Lord Himself. Well, it's not always an easy way. We know that their travels throughout the wilderness was difficult. Numbers chapter 21 talking about the people just constantly complaining. The Lord had enough, and He finally sends fiery serpents upon them. And these snakes are going to be in their midst. And many of the people were bitten, and many of them are going to die. Well, obviously they're going to complain about that as well, but God gives them another out. He gives them another way of salvation. They're going to be able to put the brass serpent on. You can see the picture there. He provides a way for them to be healed if they were bitten. So again, a way for redemption, a way for salvation. Numbers chapter 21, verse 4. Just understanding that difficult way. Well, we too can become discouraged, okay? And so there's some lessons about that. Hebrews chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 12. Just understanding that life is not always easy. We can become discouraged. We need to be able to fight through it. We too can be guilty of sin, need the forgiveness that God offers. John chapter 3, verse 14, 15. Once again, kind of recounting what was happening to them there in the wilderness as these fiery serpents were a threat to them in their lives. But God gives them a way out. He gives them that hope. And likewise, Moses, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. So we have that reward. We have that promised land waiting for us in heaven. But that sacrifice that was made, Christ as he was lifted up there on the cross, gives us that hope for redemption, that hope for salvation. But as we end the lesson this morning, as we're about to offer an invitation, we ask the question, have you been baptized? Have you come into contact with that blood? Have you taken advantage of that out that God has given us, that way for redemption? And we ask the question, will we go on? Will we continue to go through this life, even though we're going to face some difficulties, some trials, some troubles, some tribulations? Are we going to continue on? Are we going to be willing to fight through those? Are we going to complain? Are we going to murmur and want to go back to that old life? Okay? Can we lose sight? Can we not focus and concentrate on that ultimate goal, that ultimate prize of heaven? So we finish with Matthew chapter 7, verse 23. And I will declare to them, I never knew you. You depart from me, you who practice lawlessness or iniquity, as the original King James says. So we have an opportunity. We can reach that promised land. But just as many of those who had spent so much of their life traveling in the wilderness because of their lack of faithfulness, and because of their lack of trust in God, they weren't allowed to access that promised land. They died outside the promised land. Well, we want to make sure that we live our lives in a way we're accessing God's love and His opportunity, His plan for salvation for us, so that we can access that home and eternal life with Him in heaven. So if there's anyone here this morning who needs to respond, if you've not yet been baptized and become a member of the Lord's church, you have that opportunity this morning. Maybe you're a member of the Lord's church already and you've kind of gone back. You haven't been pushing on. You haven't been willing to go on in your life. But you're wanting to turn back to that old life. And you need to make that right. Perhaps you have some other need, whatever it may be. We ask you to come as we stand and sing this song of invitation.